Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Monday Night Must See TV with the Hudson Valley Squares. We got a couple new squares in the house here. Hudson Valley residents, please give a welcome to Christian Canzaneri from the Guitarist Corner show here on the channel. Grant Kickert. We got our center square today. Haven't seen him in a little bit, but he's back in the center square. He always manages to be in the center square. Mr. Butch Jones. We got Chris King Allo, Sydney Taylor, and Ryan Scow. So tonight's topic, kind of like we did last week, kind of like a discussion topic. Today, I was kind of thinking, I was thinking back on, like the late 70s, early 80s, before we started throwing around this heavy metal tag and really kind of putting bands in buckets and whatnot. A lot of bands that rocked quite a bit were called heavy metal back in the day. And now, all these years later, we look back on some of these bands. It's like, well, were they ever really a metal band? Were they more a hard rock band? Or, did the heavy metal tag, does it really work for these bands? So we're going to talk about a bunch of bands that might be somewhere in the middle, or they might not be. And that's kind of the purpose of this, to kind of get everybody's perspective on kind of, were they metal or were they just hard rock, and what is the dividing line between the two? So I'm going to start us off with a couple bands. Let's start with some American bands, first of all. Kiss, Aerosmith, and Ted Nugent. They all have heavy songs, right? But are they really metal? I'll start off with some of our newbies here. Mr. Canzaneri, Cans, we're going to call you going forward. What do you think about these bands? Great bands for sure, but are they heavy enough to be called metal?
Well, for their time, they were certainly heavier than almost anybody else. I think over the years, though, what is metal, or the definition of metal, has changed. And for me, I look back and I would say no. I mean, when I think about it, metal bands don't have harmonized background vocals. Metal bands don't constantly sing about chasing women and getting laid and doing drugs and having fun, ever, in my opinion. These guys, they're good time bands. I mean, Creatures of the Night, heavy album at the time. Was there much out there that would, you'd say was heavier than that everybody was listening to or anybody knew about, who was just a regular person? I don't know. I don't remember anything being a whole lot heavier than that besides like Black Sabbath and stuff like that. But I mean, those three bands right off the top of my head, I would say no, or at least not anymore.
Yeah, it's funny because some people talk about like, how Judas Priest was so important to heavy metal, not just for their sound, but the way they looked with the leather and the spikes and the chains. I mean, you could arguably say that, look at the way Kiss dressed for a while, right? Well, isn't that kind of similar? But then it comes back to the music, right? Grant, I don't know, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, Judas Priest never had their disco moment. Like, Dynasty was like, I mean,
they almost did.
To me, huh?
They almost did.
Hey, what Turbo? Okay, Turbo. Let's forget Turbo. But no, yeah, like to me, the funny thing about Kiss is like, Kiss will forever be a rock band, but to me, Kiss is one of those bands that actually transcends almost like a pop band. Like they tried to follow, and actually pretty successfully. They kind of followed whatever was sort of trending and popular at that time, right? So when they first started out, you had Cold Gin, you had all all the early Love Gun, all that early kind of gritty rock. But then, like as they released their solo albums and they released Death, and they became very kind of like more kind of popish. And then they decided to unmask and then become a hair metal band, like with Tears Are Falling and stuff. So I would consider them anything close to metal. And although you can still have metal elements, right? Like the stage show and the it's almost like the Spinal Tap sort of like theater of it, right? But Aerosmith to me has always been a blues band, and then of course when they started having other people write their songs for them in the 80s, that just totally took a whole new pop kind of sort of to me, I think like some of the bands like I grew up thinking, were they metal or were they not metal? Were like, early Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, but I still wouldn't consider them metal now. I think they influenced metal bands, but I wouldn't consider them metal,
Yeah, true. I mean, Butch, where do you think like Nugent sits in all this?
Hard rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, going with the three, I don't know. I don't think any one of the three are a metal band in the slightest bit. To me, metal, the difference for me for metal and hard rock is one, metal has an attitude. There's an attitude, there's a dress, and you don't, and now, except I'll say this first and then I'll go back, and you don't do ballads. That to me is the whole thing. Now, Sabbath did changes, which isn't,
Judas Priest did a couple ballads.
Yeah, I was going to
But
say
they're a-
Metallica. Yeah.
but okay, no, when I say ballad, I'm
Right.
talking about like the 80s ballad with, like you had mentioned when we were before
Power
we came
ballad.
on. Yes,
Power
the power
ballad.
ballad.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
I
talking
got
about.
it, I got it.
So, I mean,
Pure ballad.
like Victim of I'm not, Beyond the Realms of Death could be considered a ballad until it gets going, but it's not a sappy power ballad. That to me is the difference between one of the things between a metal band and a hard rock band. But yeah, Aerosmith, Nugent, who was it you say?
Aerosmith, Nugent, and Kiss.
Kiss, yeah. All three of them to me are hard rock bands. Do they have heavy moments? Absolutely. Do I like the heavy moments better? Absolutely. But they all, if you ask anybody in those bands, nobody would say that they were a metal band. I don't think they're a metal band at all.
Yeah, I would agree. I won't ask this of Sydney, but Chris, Aloe,
Yes.
how about like early Rush?
Wow, that's tough. That's a tough one. I'm going to say that in early Rush in the 70s, was metal, but by today's standards, I think it's not metal. And I think me personally on this whole topic, I agree with Christian 100%. The term heavy metal. Because the music keeps evolving, the term keeps evolving, and a ton of these bands, like you said in the magazines, absolutely were considered metal in the late 70s and early 80s. I mean, I know when you brought up the topic, Pete, I don't have them anymore, but for years I had a massive collection of old issues of Kerrang that I loved, that I bought in the early 80s. And Kerrang always featured the shit out of bands like Meatloaf and Status Quo. They couldn't fucking push those bands enough.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, maybe back then they were metal, but by today's standards, absolutely not. Same with Blue Oyster Cult and tons of other bands that kind of fall in that category. Rush, definitely, early Rush was awesome and definitely somewhat metallic, but still kind of weird and fucking proggy. So maybe in if we got that time machine, I bet you we could hang out with some stoners in 1977, and some kids back then would absolutely tell us that Rush was a metal band. But in today's standard, I'm gonna say no.
Rest of the field, pretty damn heavy. Like albums like that, I think give a lot of validity to what you're saying.
You can't be a metal band and wear a kimono.
But look at Judas Priest. I mean, they dressed like fucking Rush in like the early days.
Well, there's the thing though. Les Binks can get away with wearing a kimono, and then got fired for wearing it. So it didn't work.
Like Rob Halford was wearing like sundresses and
But you know what they'll say that Rob was wearing that stuff before they did Sad Wings. So there's
right. I mean, Priest dressed like Rush until Hellbent for Leather. That was for them. That was the turning point. And thank God, because if that hadn't happened, they might not be here.
That became the dress code.
Right.
They created the dress code.
Yes, denim and leather definitely became the dress code, 100%.
And then you think, like you were saying, Chris, before that, going like in the 70s, anything that had a heaviness to it was labeled metal or heavy metal because there was no other term yet.
Yeah.
So when the 80s came, that's when you started getting all the subgenres of stuff. It's like,
Totally.
okay, it's heavy, but it's not heavy like this band. So we got to call it something different, but still give it that metal tag because it started to sell.
Also,
Yep. And I would completely agree with Butch, that attitude thing. I can't 100% put my finger on what's metal and what's not, other than Yeah, it's like an attitude kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure too, like if I'm correct on this, like a lot of I remember reading something or hearing something that, even, like Led Zeppelin and especially Black Sabbath when they were like labeled metal didn't specifically like the term at all, which is another thing. It's that it's like it was kind of like at that time bands were like,
Oh, to this
I
day,
don't know what this,
Tony Iommi
heavy
does
metal
not
thing is.
like to be called heavy metal.
Yeah, so I think that's important too to kind of, it's this whole topic is just so hard, I think sometimes because like it has been mentioned many times already. It's like it's just evolved so much. And like Led Zeppelin at that time was considered metal. I mean,
Right.
like, it's like there was nothing heavier at that time, like than what was there. So I think it's so hard to sometimes have like a direct like I don't know. It's really difficult. The more I think about it and the more I try to like put bands in like different categories, it's like easier now. Like, I band that always comes to my head when I think about this is like Van Halen. People, at that time, like Eddie Van Halen was like a heavier guitar player who was doing all this shreddy stuff. And like maybe at that time he was considered metal, but like I don't look back on Van Halen now and say that they're metal or a hair metal band or anything like that. So I think
I was like 8 years old at a relative's party, and first time I ever heard like Running with the Devil, and I was like, oh my God, this is heavy metal. This is devil music,
right.
And it was just like it sounded so heavy at the time. And now you think of Van Halen, they're a rock band. They're a Southern California rock band,
But there are
So,
still people
yeah.
out there who call Van Halen metal. I mean, it's like we kind of, I don't know, came up in a discussion in the comments a couple months ago with another video where we were talking about Van Halen in general. And yeah, I mean, that was the next band I was going to bring up is Van Halen. It's like, so that
Right.
first album, the first couple of albums actually, pretty heavy for the time. I mean, is it
First
Black
four.
Sabbath or Judas Priest heavy? No.
Right.
I mean, but you could consider some of that stuff. I mean, I think today we look at Van Halen, again, just a great hard rock band. I mean, Butch, you probably know this band better than the rest of us do, right? They're a hard rock band. That's basically.
I mean, I've done that in the butcher shop stuff over the years, or a random question to get people to see what they think about it. Yeah, I have that line, a hard concrete line for me is that they're a hard rock band. They are not a metal band. Back to the attitude. You can't be a metal band and be smiling in every picture you ever see of Eddie Van Halen play. He's happy as shit.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the music was heavy. Yeah, I get it. But a metal band, no. And you know what? And I've actually heard David Lee Roth call them. I have a lot of bootlegs from 76, 77, and he's talking about, calling them heavy metal because it was the term. But are they a metal band? No. Not at all. Are they heavy? Joe Elliott from Def Leppard had one of the best things I thought, that like on High and Dry. A hard rock metal fan, High and Dry is everyone's favorite Def Leppard record, and they were going to be the saviors of the new wave of British heavy metal and everything. And he didn't want that. He didn't want that label. He didn't want that tag. He didn't want to be called metal. And for where they went with it, I get why he didn't, because it would have brought them down into a different area. But his term, which is the term that never caught on, that really we should use more, honestly, he called them heavy rock. And that's exactly what Def Leppard was for a time, for 3 records.
Yeah.
They were a heavy rock band. And to me, that labels it. That's Van Halen, that's Aerosmith, that's that's Nugent, that's all these bands that we're talking about. But the metal thing, they didn't wear black leather, they weren't unhappy on stage. The pictures you saw, they were smiling, they didn't have frowns all the time. And to me, that's that fine line to me that changes over from a hard rock band to a metal band is those things, the attitude, the dress, the not smiling. It's not even so much about the lyrical content. It's the other stuff, because there's bands, there's some super heavy bands that have written some songs. I mean, fucking Gojira. Gojira is one of the heaviest bands around right now. And if you didn't read the lyrics, you would know that they're talking about saving the fucking whales. But when you look at, is that metal? Saving whales? It sure sounds like it when he's singing it. But when you read the lyrics, you're like, oh, he's talking about saving whales. Oh, shit.
So, I mean, those are all good points. So let's take a look at another band.
Well, before we get there, Pete, I just want to throw in that Van Halen, and again, this is, I guess, the argument for Van Halen being a metal band, but not that I'm saying that, but way back when, Van Halen arguably headlined the biggest heavy metal concert of all time, which was the US Festival in 1983. Let's not forget Van Halen headlined over Ozzy Osbourne, the Scorpions, Judas Priest, Quiet Riot, and Motley Crue.
Forgot a band, and the band you forgot is
I was
a hard
going to
rock
say,
band.
but also the promoters of the US Festival also it decided to include Triumph on Heavy Metal Day. And let's not forget, the promoters of Heavy Metal Day originally put Joe Walsh on Metal Day, and then cooler heads prevailed, and he was pulled, and
That
in
would've been
place
great.
Motley Crue was put in. So the promoters of the US Festival can't exactly be the divining rod, I guess, on what's metal and
They were
what's
also
not.
confused.
Nothing against Joe Walsh. Nothing against Joe Walsh.
Nothing against Joe Walsh.
Right.
But listen, in
Yeah.
1983,
Those bands were all
yeah,
metal
Van
back then.
Halen was
Right.
the majority popularity of metal fans. I'm sure, felt Van Halen was in that metal category.
Yep.
They fit with those bands, though. I mean, they fit in.
Absolutely.
Totally.
It's all just a little on this side of the fence, a little on that side of the fence, but
Yeah,
You have to wonder.
Nobody blinked at them being called heavy metal back then.
No.
exactly.
No, and you know what? I was just going to say before we go.
And they were the highest paid, $1 million. That was the highest
Yeah,
paid.
they outbid David Bowie, right?
Yeah. I sometimes think that until we started getting stuff like, doom and thrash and black and death metal, that's when the dividing line came. Because before then, you could be called a heavy metal band. Maybe you were just a little bit heavier than hard rock, right? But I want to go back to a point that Butch was making before about the whole, if you're a metal band, you don't smile in the photographs and your lyrics are a certain way and stuff like that. So I was thinking about a band that I think kind of straddles the line, especially earlier in their career, especially for like one or two albums. How about Rainbow? Like the Rainbow Rising period, right? You got they're dressed a certain way. They all look really serious. The songs are kind of dark and very different. And that's many of us have called Rainbow Rising like one of the first heavy metal albums, right? Do we still think that now, all these years later?
I think I'd say it's a metal album, yeah. And
I think that lineup, the lineup
With Ronnie
the-
James Dio, they're metal.
Yes.
With Graham Bonnet, they sure as hell aren't.
they got rid of it.
Well, they're on with Joe Turner, they're definitely not. Graham Bonnet was a good bridge in between it. It was still on the heavy side.
I wouldn't say. I kind of like.
Since you've been
hold
gone,
back,
that is
Sid.
not metal. I'm sorry.
Wait. What'd you say, Sydney?
I said since you've been gone, that is not metal.
No. I will absolutely give you that. I will give you that song. But overall, think about this. So going with what Pete just said, think about, and at that time, obviously no one thought about it but it took the influence of that one record to end up, 20 years later, creating its own subgenre that is maybe not as big in this country, in America, but overseas, it's still very, very vibrant. The whole power metal thing. That one record,
That's the genesis of it right there. Yeah.
Yeah, Rising definitely gave birth to that.
and it's not a power metal record, but
So here's a quick idea. I'm just thinking about this in the terms of this conversation, right? So, what was the impetus of this, right? You had the second wave of British heavy metal, and then you had the Four Horsemen, with Anthrax and Metallica, coming to fray, and Megadeth in mid '80s, like. But what was the dividing line? Like, what influenced that from the '70s era of heavy bands to all of a sudden, again, Priest to Denim and Leather? And, to me, that defining moment was punk, right? So it was almost like bands that were striving for that heavier sound all of a sudden started to lose, like they didn't really have that kind of identification of what made them metal, right? And with punk, with the Sex Pistols, and with the Ramones, and all of '70s, late '70s punk, all of a sudden they were like, "Hey, wait a second, are we really heavier than every other band around?" And that's me when like these bands really started to make a definitive choice in their aggression, their attitude, their the fashion, the songs, and becoming a lot more focused on. Yeah, we're heavy. Really heavy.
There's one band, and I know all you guys are thinking the same band right now. There's one band that took what you just said, did it in a metal way, and again took the fashion that one band was doing, and that became the new fashion going forward, and that was Motorhead.
Right.
I think Butch is 100% right. And
That
you know
was
what?
that was the next band. I was actually going to ask Ryan, where does Motorhead fit here, right? So yeah,
I think Motorhead, like, I don't know, they kind of float above everything because Lemmy, just like Sydney was saying, Lemmy did not like being called a metal band. He just considered them a rock and roll band. Like his favorite band of all time was the Beatles. He loved Elvis. Like that's his background. And then Motorhead, you know, kind of like to go into what Grant said with like Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth. Motorhead, you know, from that world, from on the British side of things, came the band Discharge, and all those thrash bands fucking loved Discharge and that really fast early 80s English hardcore punk. They loved that stuff. Like Jeff Hanneman, that was his biggest influence. They even did the Undisputed Attitude album cover in the 90s because he loved that so much. But like Rain and Blood's basically like Jeff Hanneman's like love letter to like that English punk rock, and that all kind of Motorhead in a way. So Motorhead definitely
that's the bridge band.
You know what though? Because Motorhead have enough songs and enough albums that are just to me unambiguously metal that I love Lemmy to death, but I would consider them a metal band more often than not. They had a lot of bluesy songs. They had a lot of punk rock songs. So they were kind of everywhere. But you put a gun to my head, I'd say they're mostly a metal band.
I think that's one band that
I'm with you.
I think that there's no conversation. Sorry, Lemmy, you're a metal band, and you've flown the flag for metal since 77 or 78, whatever it was. Even if you didn't want to, even if you didn't mean to, you did.
Every thrash band, black metal band, grindcore, death metal, they all owe a huge debt to Motorhead, like before anybody. That's like the Godfather, that whole world. So
now, you know, and think of this. Think of Motorhead, okay? So you got the music, you've got the look, the leather, the bullet belt. That comes into it. The logo, the O's with whatever you call the amulet, whatever you call those things with the dot over the O's. And then that I know you guys do it. I can't think of the name of the not mascot, but I guess mascot. The war pig. Yeah. So you have that. So that's one of the first.
Mascots.
Thank you. That's like one of the first mascots.
Yeah. They had tons of attitude, probably more than any other band at the time.
I mean, they were arguably the first band to walk around with bullet belts. I don't ever remember seeing a picture of anybody wearing bullet belts till Motorhead did it.
A couple years ago. Yeah.
They were playing rock and roll songs though.
There's a band that I just thought of that kind of is one of those bands that I think could maybe for the time maybe have been considered possibly a metal band, but I would look probably maybe more now as a hard rock band. But the reason I thought of them is because we were just talking about Motorhead and kind of how they had such a big impact on like what thrash would be. And almost every thrash band I know has cited this band as being an influence, and that's UFO. And at the time, you could possibly consider them a metal band. They influenced so many, but now I would not call them a metal band. But it puts in the argument of would you have called them that then? Like just I'm talking about also based on the influence that, because every Megadeth and Metallica and Kirk Hammett, just cited them as being like
Maiden, every band, everybody talk about,
and ultimately, you know what? I don't hate to say it because it was Michael Schenker. Michael Schenker was the catalyst of all those talks because all the people you've talked about are all guitar players. If Michael Schenker wasn't in UFO, it would have been a completely different conversation. But yeah, I don't consider them metal because they had ballads on pretty much every album. They had light stuff, they had everything. But that was the awesome thing about this. Thin Lizzy too. I'm sure that's probably on your list too. To me, a hard rock band, they could do it all. They had heavy stuff for that time. They had in-between stuff. They might have a reggae flavored thing here and there. They'd have a ballad but not a power ballad, nothing sappy, but still slow enough that it would be, in the ballad territory,
I agree. With Thin Lizzy, the one album that comes to mind though is Thunder and Lightning. Like that's the album where if you're gonna say it's metal, and they're like Cold Sweat, that's a metal song.
That's a metal song.
They're Creatures of the Night.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great album. But like everything else they did, like I said, it's all over the map. Some very heavy, some mellow. But Thunder and Lightning is I don't know. I would almost consider that metal. It's so freaking heavy.
So that kind of brings me to my next thing. All right. That's like a perfect segue. You guys are doing a fantastic job here and helping me do my job. But like, so here in that instance, you talk about bringing a guitar player into the band who kind of changes their sound a little bit and pushes them into that area. So Sydney, would you have classified Whitesnake as a metal band circa like Trouble, Come and Get It, maybe Slide It In? And are they a metal band for the 87 album? Because of the influence of a guy named John Sykes, who brings that element.
I didn't say it. I didn't say it.
You didn't have to.
But it's still a drinking game thing because he said it. So he still got to drink.
I mean, prior to the 87 album, no, I don't think that there was any grounds to call them a metal band. They, to me, those early, if you want to look at, songs like, In Love in the Heart of the City, like they're a blues band to me. Like they had very bluesy roots. Like
Absolutely.
even those early albums you could say were kind of hard rock, but to me they were kind of just like a bluesy hard rock more than just like a straightforward hard rock. It's interesting because I don't know. I don't think I've ever like come right out and been like, I think Whitesnake is like a metal band. I don't think I've ever thought that. But I do think that, yes, like John Sykes' influence definitely on, if you want to look at songs like, Crying in the Rain or, songs that kind of have heavier riffage to them or, I think that he definitely brought that to the band for that album. But prior to that, I don't think. But then you also look at when that 87 came out, you also had the creation by that point of the subgenre of hair metal. And then that opens up a whole other conversation of hair metal. A lot of those hair metal bands weren't really metal. They were called hair metal. So is Whitesnake really a metal band? Are they more of a hair metal band? Are they just a hard rock band? Like that, the time that was released and even the album that came after that opens up just like a whole other conversation of like, at that point, what constitutes as metal? Because it's like all up in the air.
Yeah, because I mean, I think at their core, Whitesnake were still a heavy blues rock band, but they had this very metallic guitar player who was also a kind of a shredder, and Coverdale upped the ante too, because now all of a sudden Coverdale is screaming and shrieking, right, more so than he ever did, right, because that's what was popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that brings into, I mean, Sydney, again, you segued us into the next part of this. So what about all of these bands that we would call hair metal or commercial hard rock or glam metal? Dokken, Motley Crue, Rats, Winger, Guns N' Roses. I mean, all these bands that are popping up, the Sunset Strip and whatnot, Wasp, right? Are they metal bands? Any of them?
Wasp was.
I think it's case by case.
Wasp.
I mean,
Yeah.
Wasp definitely was.
Yeah.
And especially by the time you get to like shit like the Headless Children, like, it's almost like Iron Maiden sounding. Like that's 100% metal. I think the second Skid Row album, Slave to the Grind, that's just pure heavy metal. I don't even consider that hair metal in any fashion. That's just a metal album. But I don't know, like the first Cinderella album to me sounds like AC/DC. It's like a good AC/DC kind of album.
Yeah.
Even though on the
Record.
cover they look like a hair metal band, but the music to me, it's just like kind of bluesy hard rock. So that one you got to really go band by band, album by album.
Yeah, you're right. You have to go case by case basis, without a doubt.
Glam metal is almost a better terminology like for it than just like straightforward like metal. Like it's almost, I feel like if you put it in that, and it's like I don't want to put it in a box, but if you had to put it in a box, like to give it its own category that's not metal, like that makes sense. Because some, like a lot of those bands, like you think of like Rat and like Dokken, like it's hard because it's like probably Dokken was like a hard rock band, but they also had songs that were on the heavier side. But like, would I constitute them now as a heavy metal band? So it's like I understand the need for a subgenre like glam metal or hair metal because it makes it easier to put it in a box.
Dokken's right on the periphery, though. I consider a lot of Dokken's material pretty much metal. It's more like commercial metal.
It's very heavy, yeah.
Yeah, it's very heavy. I mean, how about like
melodic lyrics, right? Melodic songwriting, but heavy riffs. You listen to Mr. Scary, that's a really heavy tune. I mean, it's instrumental, but I mean, it's got this grit to it, and
it's interesting. People would say maybe otherwise, and that's another thing about like Image. Like, you look at them on this album cover, people would be like, that's not metal. He's wearing a cape or whatever, like or that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's another thing of like what the Image became. It's like, did that deteriorate from what if bands maybe were metal, did people not look at them as metal because of how they were dressing at that point?
Well,
But
I'll
Dokken opened for Judas Priest on the
86.
in the '86
Yeah.
tour.
Right.
You know, so it
But-
is a
He
it's a
started
tough
mixing
But-
all those tours. Yeah.
Yeah, but
one. I mean, I know lots of kids. I didn't
money.
catch that tour in '86. I really
Yeah.
wanted to, but I know lots of kids that went and saw Priest and Dokken together, and lots of kids in school the next day were wearing Dokken shirts, and nobody was like, "Wow, that band sucks. I want to fuck that bass player." No, nobody was saying that. Everybody was like, "Oh yeah, Dokken's cool."
They were all about George Lynch, just like me.
Yeah. So
oh yeah.
yeah. So
But you know
again,
what?
it's the term is constantly redefining itself. I mean, I wonder in 20 years from now, are people going to look back and maybe we should have saved this for the NP, but fuck it. Like, are people going to look at like bands like Priest and Sabbath and Maiden, the Holy Trinity, and in 20 years from now be like, well, that's not metal, that's hard rock.
Yeah, I saw an
Because
interview.
metal is going to be so fucking insane in 20 years from now.
Yeah.
Chris,
Well,
I've already had that conversation. I've been in Rock Fantasy, and I remember this. There was some, I won't name any names, and there was a guy I was arguing with. He's like, Iron Maiden is not a metal band. Iron Maiden is, I mean,
Are
the
you
Praise
kidding?
Youth, and again,
Yeah.
I have to say it, was dad rock. It was dad rock.
Well, you know what though, Brian? Was that the guy from Mastodon that was at Rock Fantasy saying that? Because he's
No, it was
Yeah, I
local
just
guy.
read an interview with the guy from Mastodon saying that Rob
Yep.
Halford, oh, he's so cute, he's acting like he's the metal god, and he's not really metal. But
You
you
know
know,
what?
we all indulge him because he's old.
And that's why I will never go
That's
see
funny.
Mastodon ever again. I mean, I don't like him anyway, although they do the Thin Lizzy thing well. I like the guitar harmony thing. But yeah, I read that. It's like, who the fuck is this guy
That was
picking on
bullshit.
fucking Priest? That he wouldn't have a
Mhm.
career if it wasn't for fucking Priest.
That's
Yeah.
Go
true.
fuck yourself.
So
Absolutely.
was that before or after Mastodon opened for Priest? I'm assuming after.
Ooh.
I think he was talking about it after, but he was relating his experience touring with Priest,
Ah.
But
Fucking asshole.
What about but my thing is like sometimes, and we talked about this with Creatures of the Night, right? You can have an album that may be a heavy metal album,
Right.
but it's a band that really isn't, metal. Like what about Accept, right? You have Restless and Wild, you have Breaker, you have Balls to the Walls, but then their later category, like Metal Heart, and is that still metal? Is
Oh,
that
shut your face.
rock?
Yeah.
Shut your face. Are you
their
serious?
newer stuff is heavier than any
Holy
of the older
shit,
stuff.
Grant.
Just because it's dramatic doesn't mean it's
Get him out of here.
Officially
God damn it, Grant.
Well, no, I'll go to bat here. But Metal Heart is more. It's like it's still metal, but it's poppier. Well, obviously,
it is popular.
Cast as a
Right.
Shark is just like a sledgehammer to your face. You know,
That's
there's zero ambiguity. But yeah, they got a
that
little
is
poppy.
that's amazing metal album, by the way. That's the story.
Yeah,
Or I
They
mean,
got a little
Restless Wild.
poppy in the late '80s, but a lot of bands did. You know, they saw. a
Yeah, you
couple
could say the
Everybody
same thing about Turbo.
Right.
Well, Turbo's another one. That's a metal album,
Yeah.
but it's
No, it's not.
Right. You got to take the
I think
out
it's
of the
metal.
equation. Out of the equation wasn't the fact that these bands wanted to write music that was more accessible to sometimes like the middle of the audience. It was the record companies putting constant pressure on them, right? Like, hey, you need to come up with a hit. Like, you need a power ballad. You need to do something that's going to sell records.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because so what we were talking about before was heavy metal, and
Right.
it was only that term. And then so we're talking, Turbo's 86,
Right.
Dokken, sure she's got his 86 under lock and key.
But
By that time, record companies didn't give a shit. They were making a lot of money. These kids are going out and buying this stuff. We need more of this, which is what ended up ruining the scene. But
Yes.
it became, like you said, Priest had to do, but Priest, how a band of Judas Priest status could make Turbo and ram it down in consecutive records.
Yeah.
It's just,
Well,
The
I
80s,
think
man. Shit was weird, but you know that better than anybody.
oh my God.
yeah.
It was weird. Absolutely. Living through it. It's like, ooh. But even then, I'm like, ooh, I love Priest. I can't, ooh, I can't do this.
If you read Halford's autobiography, there was a lot of drugs at play too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it was kind of like, and they were under pressure too, because they I think when they finished the Turbo tour, they were like, they owed so much in taxes. They didn't make any money. Like they owed so much at that point. They had the biggest tour of their entire careers. And here they are, like literally almost filing bankruptcy. So it's again, a lot of, always the equation comes down to money or, Yeah, money.
Yeah, it comes down to money.
Money.
But you know
But
what?
money.
I think we're having this conversation in the first place, though, is because there was a split probably in the early 80s. And to me, it was like when Venom came around, and there were bands that chased the money, and there were bands that chased metal.
Stay pure. That's right.
And
Stay
you know,
pure.
we're looking back at hair metal now, you know, and these bands were operating at the same time at a higher level of consciousness for everybody. And down here, you had Venom, who you know,
Man of War.
Huge in
well,
Europe.
that's the only.
It's very
real-
big in Italy, by the way.
That's its
Yeah.
own show. But
Right.
you know, there's Venom, there's underground bands, you know, Bathory, stuff like that was happening in the late 80s while hair metal was going on, and
Right.
everybody's aware of that now. And we look back and we're like, that's metal, you know.
Right.
And
They didn't
Warren-
sell out.
I
Not metal.
hate the term hair metal. I never use it. I get it. It's a quick term for you. You say it, you know exactly the bands that you're talking about. But I hate that term. I'm absolutely with Eddie Trunk on that. I hate that term.
Butt rock, is that one better?
I prefer cock rock myself.
Yeah, you know.
But you know,
family
for me,
show.
what I've always done is like the earlier bands, like up to maybe like 84, 5, maybe 84 is kind of the cutoff for me. To me, there's heavy metal bands, and then became a metal band. So I don't know if you guys get where I'm going with this, but
Yeah.
for me, a metal band without the heavy is a different thing. Still, obviously, they're both heavy, but heavy metal was, you know, Priest, Sabbath, Maiden, Motorhead, Saxons, bands like that.
So
And then
heavy metal is more the old school. Metal
yes, it's a whole school thing, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, it became metal, and then you had the subgenres of everything, but it was all called metal. But yeah, you know, I love a lot of the bands. Like Sydney likes that term that I don't want to say again, but the hair metal thing. And I
Right.
love a lot of those bands. And it wasn't about the image; it was the songs were great. Now, were they Motorhead heavy? No, but were they? You know, I love Rat. I love Warren D. Martini. Are the first 4 Rat albums awesome? I think they're awesome. Absolutely. Are they heavy metal? No, because to me it's metallic, but with the underlying thing is that they're hard rock.
Yeah, those are rock albums. I would agree.
Yeah.
I think those are all rock albums.
I think glam metal is a better term than hair metal.
I don't even like that.
But like it is. But it is. I mean, you look at
There's almost no
one
perfect
unifying
term.
factor of those bands, and it's. I mean, yes, they all sounded very similar, but like one thing that always differentiates those bands from like something like Sabbath or like, you know what I mean, like is like looks. Like that's
Right.
you know, you look at Motley Crue and like Shout at the Devil, you know, like it's the looks.
I always wondered why we couldn't just call them hard rock bands. Is it because they had so much of an image thing going on that we had to put something else there? I think that's what it's all about. I kind of blame MTV for a lot of this stuff.
Oh, yeah, 1,000%. It's all MTV, 100%.
Yeah. It was a marketing. It was all
was
about
visual.
marketing.
It became visual. Before that, it wasn't visual, and now it's like you've got to sell it. Forget the radio. Now you can watch it and hear it. So you're absolutely right. But Sydney, the crew thing. Shout out the Devils, badass. They look awesome on that. To me,
Oh, well, yeah.
the glam thing for me was kind of on Girls, and Dr. Feelgood, where they
And
kind of
Peter
got
Pan.
into that.
Peter Pan, yeah.
Well, I was thinking more about like that's kind of like to me like I feel like around the time that started. Do you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like the differentiation to me between like I don't know. It's just like the makeup, like you know what I mean. Like it was more of like okay, Judas Priest was wearing denim and leather and they had the studs and everything, but then it's like it took on a whole other thing when like you know, and it wasn't makeup like Kiss makeup or Alice Cooper makeup. It was makeup like
Girls. Like
girl
girls makeup.
So,
Yeah, but in Shout at the
X
Devil, Motley
Factor.
Crue looked tough, and in Theater of Pain, they looked like a bunch of broads that you wanted to screw.
Right.
So it was definitely still makeup, but it was totally different.
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally
I
different.
was just saying that was kind of like the beginning. I feel like of what eventually.
No, you're right. You're right.
You
I
know?
can't argue that. You're right. Yep. And then Poison came, and then you know the Bon Jovis of the world came, and that's even different. They weren't even made up. They just looked like girls with the hair and everything. But the music was also very light.
I want to add another dimension to this. Twisted Sister, because well, hold on. They came from that New York background of like bands like the
Right.
New York Dolls.
New
who were
York
doing-
Dolls, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
You had the sort of the androgynous, you know, makeup look. And they were like Under the Blade is heavy as fuck. And those
It's
you know,
heavy. Yeah.
You can't fuck
looked
with
like
them.
that, but they also had that dimension of like, you're not gonna fuck with these guys because
Right.
they're gonna kill you and
Right.
steal your girl and smash your car. Like they had that reputation. But they dressed like women. And they were doing that
Way
Under
before.
the Blade was 81, I think, or 80.
82.
82. Okay, so early on they were doing that. They dressed like that, before any of those other bands. And that, like Destroyer, come on, that song's heavy as hell.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. No doubt.
That's a metal album. That live at Writing Fest footage, that's a metal band. There's no
100%.
hard rock. That's 100% heavy metal.
Yep.
Obviously, where they went
East
after
Coast.
was different, but
East Coast, exactly.
East Coast scene. The West Coast scene was totally different.
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
true too.
and
Yeah,
also
you-
I think the East Coast scene grew organically. Nobody was going out looking to sign Twisted Sister because we needed a bunch of freaking guys in makeup who look like they're going to beat your ass.
That's right.
But out in LA, it was the damn agent's job to go find the next Motley Crue and four other
Yep.
Warren, a couple of Firehouse and Slaughter and whoever else just to fill out a roster for a label.
Right. Well, we didn't have the clubs. I mean, we had some awesome clubs here in the East, but we didn't have that scene like they had out there. You couldn't just
Yeah.
go from club to club to club. You had to get in the car and drive
Yep.
an hour to the next club.
Yeah.
And
The
how
scene was
many
different.
years did Twisted Sister play before they
I
got?
was just gonna say, yeah, it took them forever to get signed. Nobody wanted them.
Right?
They were
Yeah.
selling out, 2,000 seaters in New York City, but couldn't get a record deal.
Shit, I don't know
Yeah.
about you guys. I mean, but I saw I used to see Twisted Sister in Poughkeepsie at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center annually without a record deal. And that was a 4,000 seat venue.
It's amazing.
And they would sell it out twice a year without a record deal. It was an event.
Yeah.
You went to school, you went to junior high the next day, and you knew who the cool kids were because they all had Twisted Sister shirts on with the pink TS on it. So that's monumental, but that's something that's never going to happen again. But Ryan, I started laughing because I knew where you were going with Twisted Sister. That's why I was laughing. I wasn't laughing at you, I was laughing with you.
You guys are right. East Coast versus West Coast, 100%. Yeah, that's
Oh.
definitely a
Yeah.
whole different universe.
Big difference.
So a band we haven't really talked about, maybe we kind of finish up with these guys. I don't know about you guys, and some of you, weren't alive at the time, but when Back in Black first came out, we all thought that was a metal album. Now that's still a really heavy album, but I never thought of AC/DC as a metal band ever.
No, nope,
Right.
nope. Same thing. Hard rock, blues based band.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
right on the hairy edge of hard rock, right before I think it kind of trips over in the metal. Because it's a bluesy hard rock band, and the early stuff is totally like great bluesy rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, the guitar tone on like Let There Be Rock and like Powerage, it's disgusting. It's so freaking heavy. But the music's just, to me, it's just like good bluesy hard rock.
It's just
Bluesy
blues, yeah,
chords.
really electrified blues. I mean, to Chris's
Yeah.
point earlier about, AC/DC was headlining, Monsters of Rock and Castle Donington,
Yeah.
all these huge
Yeah.
metal festivals, but they're not really a metal band, right? But they appeal to that same.
But back then, I think they were. When I was a kid, I liked AC/DC, and they were a metal band. I
I
felt
feel
they were a metal band, and everybody else.
Because
And I thought
of
it
your
was really
youth, right?
weird. I thought it was weird how they were a metal band, but all the jocks seemed to like AC/DC. They all liked AC/DC and Rush, but no other real metal. And I thought that was so strange
Really
in the early
Spanish.
'80s in high school. But
You know what?
I had 4 albums when I was a kid. I used to go to this music shop for trumpet lessons because I was a complete band geek, right? And
Sure
I was
were.
I was like in elementary school going for trumpet lessons, and they had this record section, and the record section had the Bee Gees and all this other stuff. And eventually, every once in a while, there'd be just a couple darker albums in there, right? And I remember there were 4 albums that I picked up that I thought at the time when I was 10, 11 years old was metal. And you're going to laugh when you hear these, right? Obviously, Blizzard of Oz, right? I was like, oh, this is metal. Moving Pictures, Rush. I was like, oh, this is Witch Hunt. This is metal. The Cars. I didn't think it was metal, but I thought it was really a heavy album, right? And again,
Back in Black.
Back in Black, right? But then Pete
welcome.
knows this story. Pete knows the story. The first heavy metal album I ever bought, I'm going through the thing and I see the cover for Live Evil for Black Sabbath. Now I'd heard of Black Sabbath before, but I had never heard it before. And I'm looking and I see a knight, I see an angel, I see a devil, I see all this stuff. I took that album home and I put it on my record player and I was like this. Ooh, what is this? This is demon music. And to me, that was like I never heard, I mean, I had heard maybe Black Sabbath, like a kid playing it in high school, but I never owned an album. To me, that was like, yeah, all this other stuff, including Ozzy at the time, which still I consider very metal, but all that stuff was like, yeah, that ain't metal. Sabbath is metal. This is the heaviest thing I ever heard in my life, you know?
And you know what, Pete? I think you really hit on something there, because I think maybe Back in Black might have been the signal. It might have been the turning point record, because it was very heavy for the time. You know what I mean? And think of what's it like in the top 5 selling albums of all time. Yeah. So that's the album I think really that kind of turned it over. Okay, we can make money on this, calling it metal, and it's the first record that sold a lot of copies.
You might be right, Pete. There were 2 albums that came out in that period. I remember this. It was AC/DC Back in Black and REO Speedwagon, High Fidelity. And it was like, High Fidelity was like the FM sort of like Air Supply movement, right? And then AC/DC was like, we're like, this is metal, you know? And
how much of Back in Black, for everything we're talking about here, is due to Mutt Lange's production, right?
Right.
Because you look at all of AC/DC catalog, that's the one album that sounds like freaking massive.
My 2 favorite AC/DC records are both produced by Mutt Lange.
Yeah.
So Highway to Hell before it. So
yeah.
And they sound great.
And I'm going to save you, Grant, because you're going to get killed probably in the comments. Is High Infidelity. So I know Grant knows the record. High Infidelity.
High Infidelity. Yes.
You know what, Pete? I had one thing about AC/DC, because I said they were a bluesy rock band, but they had these songs like Riff Raff, Let There Be Rock, Whole Lotta Rosie, which, like, I don't know, like, it's bluesy, but those songs are like fast.
They're aggressive.
Yeah, very aggressive. For like, it's weird to see like stuff that still sounds bluesy, but still has like that level of intensity to it, with that really nasty like Angus's guitar tone. And to me, they were the only band that kind of straddled that line, like between those 2 worlds, so perfectly. And once Brian came on, they became more of an arena band. Still great. Back in Black is phenomenal, but like the Bon Scott era kind of had that edge to it, where they were able to stand on both sides of that fence even for only a couple of years. So I don't know. To me, I could make the argument for that band either way.
But that's exactly what I was going to say, Ryan, is going kind of the opposite of what you just said, but it's the guitar tone.
Mm-hmm.
AC/DC's guitar tone is so clean that it has to be hard rock. It wasn't dirty.
Yeah.
That's a metal thing, is the dirt. And they don't have the dirt. And that's what makes them AC/DC, that they don't have the dirt. Everyone talks about that. Listen to AC/DC. It's fucking, if you're going to play AC/DC, turn your gain down. You can't have it on 10. You got to have it on 3. And that's the AC/DC thing.
Semo hollow body, right?
Yeah.
And an SG,
the Gretsch.
right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's their thing, is that it's almost like it's the anti-metal thing, but they were creating metal-like stuff. You know what I mean?
That maybe if the guitar tone is different, it wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, to Sydney's point, so then sometimes I look at Motorhead as like the filthy, dirty, anti-metal AC/DC or pro-metal AC/DC, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you add in some filthy guitar tones and a little gravelier vocal style,
Perfect. Yep.
bigger bass tones, and boom, you have Motorhead, which you strip away some of the stuff, and are Motorhead and AC/DC that much different from each other?
No, you're absolutely
Those
right.
are the 2 bands that are always kind of accused of doing the same record over and over again.
Like all those albums, they're all.
Yeah.
I bought all of them. I don't care if they're all the
That's
same.
a great point. That's a great point.
But if we were talking to Manowar that right now, they'd be like, fuck every band you're talking about, they're all false metal. We are the only ones, right? So
I know
that's why I had to mention them.
Well, even them though, man. The early Manowar records are incredible, but
Yes.
they just got fucking weird like 20 years ago with all this orchestra and shit. Like, what are you guys doing?
That never happened. That just,
Oh no, it happened because I jumped off that Motorhead ship like 20 years ago.
Listen to one of them yesterday, as a matter of fact. So
I'm sorry to hear that,
but I like to keep my memory of them pure with those old albums.
No, but they're still going. They're still going.
They are.
Yeah.
I've heard that new stuff when they re-record. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, like the last 20 years has been horrible.
Mm-hmm.
At least we have the classics, right? So
That's it.
And by the way, I feel like I was like saying like bad things about like the glam metal. Like glam metal is like my favorite. It's like deep in my heart. So it's not, there's not anything bad about it. I feel like just sometimes it's looked at as not being heavy enough because of the image, if that makes sense.
You're 1,000%
Which is
right.
what I was
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
say.
No,
Is that not that it's not heavy, but I feel like sometimes other people who are like more like, I love like
It's
metal.
a
You
lot of
know,
it's a song
that is
structure. It's, you know, you have a verse, a chorus, a bridge. You know, it's melodic. You know,
Right.
and then there's like a part. You know, it's very formulaic in terms of like the song structure. A lot of metal songs don't have that pattern. It's whatever they put down on the track. Like,
Well,
you know, so
I'll Sydney, I'll say this. I absolutely agree with you. I don't think it's like what Grant is saying. To me, it's not so much about the song structure and I hate having to say the fucking term, the glam metal, hair metal, whatever. There were some of the greatest guitar players of the 80s that were in those bands.
oh yeah,
And
They're
that's
phenomenal.
and that's a big reason why those bands, we're talking about them right now in 2021. And it's not that the songs weren't good, because the songs were fucking great. Now, did they make sappy power ballads and shit? Yes, they did. And I don't like that stuff. But yes, you're 1,000% right. It's about under lock and key, looking at your shirt. I love that record.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when George Lynch is going to be in this area in a couple of weeks, if I was to bring up to him about the cover of that, he would laugh and you know, not make eye contact with me because his hair is Lamar from Kajagoogoo. But it didn't matter to me at that time because he was fucking cool and he was George Lynch.
Yeah.
So
And
it didn't make a difference.
I love the image stuff a lot, just because it's to me what made that time what it was. And so I also love it from a time of me like looking at it being like, oh, I wish it was around and like got to experience that too. But I feel like, I guess like my main point was just like, I feel like sometimes because of that, it's like the music itself is kind of like forgotten, and it's more of like, it's more so been a judgment of what the bands looked like image wise rather than the music. And because of the image, it was more of like, you can't be metal, or you know what I mean? It was like,
that's what I'm saying. I'm 1,000% agreeing with you, and you're absolutely right. But people were wrong.
Right,
Now,
and I agree with that.
But along with that, there were some awful bands in that time that did exactly about the look and it was all substance, and the songs weren't there. But the bands that had great songs that also, because they were making money, had to poof their hair out or wear capes and stuff like that, because it was 1987.
Right.
You know, it was what it was. But the songs are still great, and I still listen to that. There's bands now that I listen to the same stuff that I listened to at that time. The bands that I love then, I love now. It doesn't change. It was great then, it's great now. But there were bands that were awful then, and they're awful now.
Yeah,
and a lot of those bands
are worse now, right? Some of them
and a lot of those bands, it was all image. It wasn't about the song. Maybe they had an MTV, back to the Pete's thing, maybe they had an MTV hit because they looked good, and it was a song that the girls liked, and guys went where the girls, you know, were, and that whole thing. But that was what killed the hair metal, glam metal thing. Was that? But the bands that were great, and that, now I love Winger, and people can say whatever they want to say about Winger. Listen, the second Winger record's awful. I throw that one out. Yeah. But the first record and everything after that is awesome. Red Beach is phenomenal. Kip Winger is a phenomenal singer. He's one of my favorite singers. I love his voice, and I will always defend him. Beavis and Butthead killed him because they made a joke on it and ruined their career. But are they talented? Absolutely. Did they fall into that glam hair metal thing and then got out of it because they realized, oh shit, we got to get out of this because we're stuck in this, and they got out of it and they moved on. But it's great shit.
Yeah. Sorry to create, like, you know, go off on something else there, but the more I thought about it,
it's important.
I felt like the more I thought about it, I was like, it sounded like I was like, I don't know, saying bad things about that time, and it's my favorite time, and I love
Sydney, listen. We know, and anyone that watches this show knows where your heart is. They know that you live with the hair metal stuff, and I know that I live with Thin Lizzy. There is no problem. No one is ever thinking anything other than that.
And if Rich Catino's watching right now, he is jumping for joy that we talked about Winger for 3 minutes on this.
Winger,
Winger,
yeah.
Sydney, I'll throw this in too.
He's only 17.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be a future show. Just unappreciated hair metal bands. There we go. Or glam.
Oh,
metal.
I'm plotting something.
Yeah.
I know
That would be
because
good.
a couple folks on here who know a lot about that stuff.
What
So-
were you gonna say, Ryan?
Sydney, I'll say this too. Obviously, the circles I travel in, the concerts, the people I know, way more black metal, death metal,
Right.
thrash. I know a metric shit ton of people who love Slayer, Morbid Angel, who are huge hair metal fans. Like way more like, oh, if you love Morbid Angel, you can't like Winger. Bullshit. I know so many people that love that stuff equally. It's pretty common.
Listen, Pete, Butch, myself, guitar players, we grew up like literally loving guitar players. And I mean, reading tablature, like these guys, the guitar players in these bands were monsters. They all lived in the shadow of Eddie Van Halen, right? But they were all monster talents in their own right. And even if the song or even if the band just didn't really gel with you, you still admired that guitar player. You're like Dan Huff. Like I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Autograph. Yeah, see, right. Yeah, it's like I wasn't a big autograph fan, but Steve Lynch is an amazing guitar player. Like,
well, goddamn, Grant, you just hit one right there. Fucking the band Giant with Dan Huff.
right.
Oof. Dan
Yeah,
Huff is a monster.
Guitar player. These guys were doing session work, like fixing other people's guitar solos. Warrant.
Well, I was gonna say one of my favorite guitar players on the planet is a guy named Mike Slammer that no one knows, but Mike Slammer is the guy that did the solos, all the solos on the first 2 Warrant records, and he's done a lot of stuff. He was in the band City Boy from the 70s that I love to death.
He was in Streets, Steve Walsh's band when he left.
Streets,
exactly.
Right, he's a monster guitar player, and he would just come in as a hired gun and fix
some shit.
They'd have fix the solos basically. They'd be like, okay, you guys, great take. Why don't you guys take off for the day? And then they'd bring Mike in, and then Mike would like completely redo the solos, and like that's what ended up on the album.
And Ryan, I completely agree. You can listen to Carcass and Death, and then listen to Winger, and it's totally okay.
Absolutely.
So
that's a reputation. People are like, oh, if you like this, you can't like that. But I'm telling you, I know I can think of dozens of people I know who are like, I don't give a fuck. I like Carcass and Winger and that,
including me, Ryan. I mean, I've always said I can listen to Merciful Fate and then listen to Striper right after it.
Which is why we're all on this show, because we talk about all different types of metal.
They're both great. Good is good. That's it.
Agreed.
That's it. Good is good.
Good is good.
Good is good.
We're still working the Winger angle with Chris Allo, but we'll get there one day.
Yeah. Ever since I saw him open for Deep Purple, that sunk that ship right there.
All right, everybody, there you have it. An hour's worth of discussion. Are they metal? Are they hard rock? In the comments below, let us know what you feel about some of these bands. Some of them are iffy, some of them could go either way. But, if you've been around a lot of these bands for as long as most of us have, I think over time, the perception of a lot of these groups and a lot of these genres has kind of changed a little bit. But one thing we can all agree on, it's all just heavy rock anyway, right? So there you have it. So thanks everybody for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. For the cans, for Grant Kickert, for Butch Jones, for Chris King Allo, for Sydney Taylor and Ryan Scow, I am Pete Pardo. See you next week. Take care, everybody.